This video is sponsored by Bellesa. Stay tuned for more information about our massive giveaway. So last month, pop superstar and feminist discourse firestarter Sabrina Carpenter released a new music video for the third single from last summer's album, Man's Best Friend, which meant that it was time for my friends and I to play Predict a Discourse in our heads and our group chat as soon as it was released. This is, of course, an easy game to play when it comes to discussions about women in pop culture. If you've been here for a while, you already know how important I find the sort of worn-in narratives that spring up around women to be. The talking points we copy and paste from one situation to another based on how morally righteous it makes us feel to be the first one to apply it to this situation, or how many Reddit upvotes the sentiment could have garnered us to say at one point or another. Something that is so easy for bad faith actors to manipulate. Kind of the real source of my fixation on this issue, but, it just keeps coming out in relation to these blonde women. Anyway, I think part of why Predict a Discourse is so easy is because a lot of people on the internet assume they are doing critical thinking when they are not. They are being critical, and for sure, something approximating thinking is happening. But I'll be honest, as somebody who spends a lot of time looking at them, a lot of the complaints I see circulated and recirculated about women feel more like outrage autocomplete than they do like meaningful attempts at literacy or feminist analysis. A lot of this round of outrage autocomplete is, of course, largely reheated from last summer, when Sabrina Carpenter Discourse hit critical mass following the release of the first variant of her album cover for the aforementioned Man's Best Friend. Her sixth studio album, but only the second since she reached wide mainstream commercial success, with Espresso and Please 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 off of Short and Sweet. And I covered a lot of the broad strokes of this at the time in my video about the album cover, but that was really a video about how pretending that the individual choices of a woman are what keeps us trapped in patriarchy rather than the systemic structural issues of the society we live in is in itself a form of choice feminism. Like I said, deep fixation, gotta package it somewhere. I don't want to go over all of that again. I do not want to feel compelled to do an overview of Sabrina Carpenter's career and controversies. If you missed that other video I made the first time around, or you feel like revisiting it after this video, you can find the first Sabrina Carpenter video linked in the description below, along with my friend Little Shop of Allie's videos about Sabrina. Those are not required viewing exactly for the rest of this video, but they are highly recommended. I probably wouldn't have re-enlisted on the side of Sabrina Carpenter in the war on Sabrina Carpenter if Allie and I hadn't researched for those videos together last summer. A lot of these criticisms of her might have slid off my radar, and they might have slid off of yours too. Doesn't mean they're not happening. We're experiencing similar but different internets. Some of us see worse discourse than others, and a lot of this feels broadly applicable, which is why I'm making a video. I want to talk about a more specific allegation I've seen levied against Sabrina Carpenter this time. We already discussed the accusations that she was setting women back, harming feminism, participating in self-objectification. That's all covered in the other video. What made me want to come back and talk about Sabrina again this time is a more specific version of the accusations that she's harming women, which is the accusation that Sabrina Carpenter is harming queer women in particular. I felt, as a feminist and lesbian who makes conversational commentary videos about both of those things, particularly qualified to weigh in on that aspect of this conversation around Sabrina Carpenter. But before I do, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, my good friends at Bellesa. If you've already been here for a while, you already know exactly how much I love Bellesa. They are a bi-woman company for all things sexual wellness, with a mission to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality. I'm so excited to be partnering with them again today for another video and another massive giveaway. Everyone who signs up using my link in the description below wins a free rose suction toy with your order. The rose toy is a viral TikTok sensation, and for good reason. It has 10 different modes and fits perfectly in the palm of your hand to provide you with complete control of your pleasure. It's so cute and discreet. Look at it, it literally looks like a rose. And if discretion is your vibe in a sex toy, I can't wait to show you their newest addition, the Makeup Kit. It includes a lipstick-style thumping vibrator, a bullet vibrator hidden in a makeup brush, a compact with suction and thumping functions, a suction toy disguised as a nail polish bottle, and a vibrating beauty blender. The discreet design is so cute, the vibrators look like glam products, and personally, I just found some of the noises from this set to be so satisfying. This kit is playful, stylish, and travel ready to help give you the privacy to figure out more satisfying sounds anywhere. Or, of course, you could be interested in the Air Vibe, their most classic heartthrob. This comes with dual stimulation, both internal and external, and it comes in the most discreet casing you can get without disguising it as makeup. It is waterproof, rechargeable, and so quiet for how strong it is. Check out the link below to see which of Bellessa's toys get you oh so hot. And remember, everyone who signs up using my link in the description wins a free rose suction toy with your order. Thank you so very much to Bellessa for sponsoring this video and so many others on the channel. Let's get back to Sabrina Carpenter, shall we? My friends and I knew immediately upon watching the house tour music video that some of the shots of the women's bodies in this music video were going to be commented on. And we knew enough, might I add, to quite accurately predict even some of the exact phrasing that would be used. Male gaze, of course, but also the phrase ass shots, both of which were, in fact, terms that I found in the Reddit thread my friend Little Shop of Alley found later. And we're going to spend more time talking about the male gaze later, but what's more interesting to me right now are these sort of queerbaiting allegations that I'm seeing in conjunction with the complaints about the ass shots. I think some of people's issues with Sabrina on this front, I have to allow, are a reaction of some sort to the Taste music video, be it a delayed sort of reaction, or people who were angry about it then still being angry about it now, and hopping onto the discourse every time the cycle comes back around so that everybody can add this queerbaiting allegation to their list of reasons not to like Sabrina Carpenter.
Just watched Sabrina Carpenter's Taste, and honestly, it might be one of the straightest music videos I've ever seen. The whole video is about women fighting and stabbing each other over a guy, but everyone's losing their minds over a brief kiss. If you think this MV is a win for the LGBTQIA+ community, you're missing the bigger picture. The whole thing made me uncomfortable. The lyrics, the violence, and then Jenna accidentally kissing Sabrina, mistaking her for the guy and attacking her when she realizes the mistake. This MV seems like a poor representation of women and doesn't really support the LGBTQIA+ community. Why is it being celebrated?
It's a cyclical round of discourse. As Gavin Xue wrote for Pride.com back in February of this year, so before this most recent round,
every time Sabrina Carpenter displays queerness, the internet goes crazy. She kissed Jenna Ortega in the Taste music video. She made out with a female alien at the live performance of her summer hit Espresso. She posed on all fours with a pup play reference to her latest album cover, Man's Best Friend. She danced with her drag mother, played by Coleman Domingo, in the Tears music video, set to campy Rocky Horror Picture Show aesthetics. Then, at this year's VMAs, she dances with drag artists holding banners advocating transgender rights. At first glance, it looks like a marketing gimmick. A doll-like blonde pop star kissing women and dancing with drag queens only for attention. It resembles the kind of tactics that straight celebrities usually use, showing queerness to an extent that is just enough to trend, but far from risking anything. It is palatable and agenda-free. Appropriating queer elements but not actually delivering their meanings is queerbaiting. But Sabrina Carpenter is not playing this game. What she does is way stronger, way more consistent, and way more interesting. She is feminine in a campy way, and camp is inherently queer. While garnering all the attention she needs, Sabrina Carpenter is deeply incorporating this queerness into her artist persona through her performances. She is embracing the community by camping her femininity.
But like I said, that was written way before this most recent round of discourse, and we are here ostensibly to talk about her most recent release. Damn, second most recent, I guess, because she did a song with Madonna that came out while I was working on this. But still. The house tour music video is honestly, as most Sabrina Carpenter music videos are, a lot of fun. It features Sabrina, Madeline Klein, and Margaret Qualley. It's in keeping with a lot of the theming from earlier entries in the Sabrina Carpenter cinematic universe, where, beginning with Espresso and Triple Please, her character in her music videos is off on an extended crime spree of sorts, stealing credit cards, being arrested, and, of course, as I'm sure you have heard about by now, killing men. In this particular installment of the SCCU, Sabrina and her friends disguise themselves in a cleaning van, pretty girl cleanup crew, to let themselves into a mansion, which they party in and dance around in their underwear and or clothing from the mansion that they're burglarizing. As I already mentioned, there are a few shots of the women in this video that I already knew would be discharitably described as ass shots, like when we see the women from below as they chase each other upstairs playfully, or the three of them bent over pushing the couch that they're stealing. Even these shots that we knew that people would have complaints about are really not what you think of when you think of the prototypical male gaze shots. We'll be talking more about the male gaze of it all, but I just want to mention while I'm talking about the music video itself, these so-called ass shots are very fleeting. There's actually not a lot of time where the butts are like the sole focus. They kind of like flirt off and glance. It feels like, as with much of Sabrina Carpenter's aesthetics, it's about feeling cute in panties and thinking your butt looks good. And I don't think that's a morally bad thing. I would say it's, and I mean, saying this after talking about the ass shots is only partially intentional, but it's a cheeky music video. I have used the word cheeky to describe Sabrina Carpenter before, and it's one I come back to a lot with her. You know, her saying the alternate variants of the Man's Best Friend cover were approved by God, weighing in to confirm that she can, in fact, get into a car without help, her lyrics being a solid 40% innuendo on average. Even in this music video for House Tour, when she steals a Grammy from the house they're robbing, most likely nodding to Man's Best Friend having 6 nominations and not taking home a win during the last Grammy cycle. It's cute and self-referential and high effort, and those are things that we really should know by now are highly engaging to the fandoms that spring up around pop stars. I think a lot of the people who find themselves very upset with Sabrina are picking and choosing which ways that they would like to take her seriously in ways that I find pretty contrary to her actual output. I don't think a deep analysis of Man's Best Friend as an album and a piece of art actually lends itself much to the more reactionary readings of it that were circulating at the time of my first video about her. Even just Man-Child, the opening track and lead single from the album, I feel gets reacted to in ways that are not backed up by actual analysis of the song or what is said in it. The song itself, like all of Sabrina's and much of what you hear on the radio, is poppy and upbeat and cheerful, but Man-Child is nothing that I would describe as being an actual love song, and the more time that I spend with Sabrina's music, the more that I realize most of her songs do not quite qualify as such. Man-Child is not a song about happily settling and how she can only expect so much from men and has resigned herself to be happy anyway. It's a song complaining about how the men she ends up in relationships with suck, and how she feels like those men are drawn to her. And even ignoring that, even setting aside the very particular way she decided to phrase, "I choose to blame your mom," which makes it clear that it was in fact not actually his mother's fault, but that it's an excuse she would make to continue to date these so-called man-children. We now have an entire rest of an album to look at, which we did not last summer. And that album is an album about being in your 20s and dating being terrible. And I think, pretty crucially, it's an album that ends on the song Goodbye, which is not only a super fun listen that feels like an honorary ABBA song, but that actually exists as a pretty empowering breakup song. That goodbye means losing the narrator for life, that she will not, in fact, continue to accept just any kind of treatment. Be treated like a dog, like she's man's best friend. Do you get it? Do you get what she was going for? A lot of people didn't. But we were already talking about another thing I think people didn't really understand when Sabrina Carpenter did it, the House Tour music video. It's a short song, so it's a short video too. It's only 3 minutes and 34 seconds long, mostly her being cute and sexy with her friends while they party in the mansion that they're burglarizing. She kills a man in the last few seconds, just when you wonder if that tradition has ended, and amongst it all, she's being, I don't know, vaguely homoerotic with her very beautiful friends. I guess maybe more than vaguely homoerotic. There is a shot where Sabrina and Madeline are dancing, and Sabrina pulls her close and squeezes her ass. I think this is why the music video harkens back to people's existing discontent about the Taste music video, which was basically genetically engineered for Sabrina Carpenter to kiss Jenna Ortega in an elaborate Death Becomes Her send-up. In neither music video are the characters kissing for male attention. Not in universe, not as an actual description for what they're doing. There is no male attention to be had in the House Tour music video. Hi! But despite of that, this is still so much of the language of the accusations I have seen levied against this music video and Sabrina Carpenter at large in that Reddit thread my friend Allie dug up and some others.
This might sound nitpicky to people who aren't gay, but as a lesbian, I really don't think we need to bring back straight women grabbing each other's asses and kissing each other as part of a cutesy, sexy shtick. Honestly, super frustrating to see that thrown in there.
As a bisexual woman, I agree. And every time I say this, I get accused of biphobia, and I have no idea why. I just think it's a little icky and performative. I don't know if that's the right word.
Okay, not to take the easy dunk here against a Reddit commenter who didn't ask to be in this video, but yeah, it's performative. It came free with her being a pop star. She didn't actually rob a house either. She was performing that too. And I might have some news about those men that you might have thought she really for real murdered. And also, just to take things to the Judith Butler school of theory here, yeah, it's performative. It came free with her having a gender. I talked about this in my first Sabrina Carpenter video, that cis women can and do in fact have gender and can and do in fact perform campy, exaggerated versions of that gender, which is something I actually found myself thinking about again recently when I watched my friend Marty McFlone's excellent video about Barbie and gender.
Quick drag 101, I guess, but a person of any gender or sexuality can be a drag queen, but the persona is traditionally considered an exaggerated performance of femininity. Which one of my favorite things about drag as an art form is that even how you choose to express those exaggerated personas can vary wildly. With drag, you can be an ode to a classic Hollywood actress, or an alien, or a cyborg, or a multi-headed monster, or even a walking piece of performance art that celebrates gender-affirming care.
Also, side note, highly recommend that video about Barbie and everything else on Marty's channel. They're just getting started making videos, but they've been making my thumbnails for a while. They're making really, really great videos, and they're super close to their first 1,000 subscribers. You're going to want to be able to say you were subscribed way back then. So go check them out. They're really cool. But just to bring things back to Sabrina here, I am more than willing to double down in my reading of Sabrina Carpenter's aesthetics as drag adjacent. In fact, she's only brought in more and more obvious queer influences into her work since I first said that there was a certain femme lesbian sensibility to many of her outfits. And even without that, her aesthetics are such a clear exaggeration of a feminine caricature, that asks to be read as both sincere and satirical at once, as do many of her songs if you engage with them in the way I think you're meant to. Sabrina Carpenter is doing gender theater. She is doing a performance of a woman. I think that's drag, and I think that's art. And I think everyone is performative, but pop stars and drag queens maybe most of all. And even if Sabrina doesn't identify with the label of drag queen the way Chapel Roan does, I really think that with Sabrina Carpenter, as with a lot of other women in this pop space, she's still got both things going on, whether or not she identifies with them both. My nitpicks about criticizing someone's performativity in the first place in this context aside, back to the Reddit commentary about this video, but really maybe just about Sabrina Carpenter as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, another term that kept coming up in the discussion of this video was male gaze, which I find a bit funny. Nearly every time I've heard that word used in at least the last 2 years, it has been either misapplied or somebody talking about it being misapplied. A living human woman cannot pander to the male gaze, because rather than the nebulous and unattainable concept of male approval that people pretend the term stands for, male gaze actually comes from film theory and academic discussions about the representations of women in media, how they're represented by male filmmakers, filmed for the gratification of a presumed male audience and serving no function but as sex objects and wish fulfillment. Certainly not a way that I would say that the women in the Sabrina Carpenter cinematic universe are represented. To see that claim levied against a human woman for her existence and her appearance is bad enough. As I said in the Choice Feminism video, hey, that's still a person you're talking about. But to see it levied against a music video that was directed by 2 women, heavily influenced by at least 2 other female filmmakers, and which really just featured a set of hot friends dancing around and having a good time while they robbed a house, there's a disconnect at a certain point between the words you think you're saying and the things those words actually mean. This use of male gaze against Sabrina is one of the examples of outrage autocomplete that I mentioned at the top of the video. I think this misapplication of big words is a tendency we see a lot with words that make us feel very smart to know. Gaslighting and learned helplessness, among others. Words like emotional labor or woke terms that once had actual useful meaning and now have had their cultural understanding mostly decided by the people who think the ideas originally being spoken to with that language are ridiculous. And I've spoken a lot about this. I mean, that last video about Sabrina Carpenter that I mentioned was really about how it's still choice feminism to accuse Sabrina Carpenter of being a choice feminist for making what you see as the wrong choices. Even if you think you know more feminist theory than another woman, if you think her individual choices would help us get free of the patriarchy if she only made the choices you think are more feminist, you're doing choice feminism. Just knowing a word and then misusing it does not give you a better grade in being a feminist than the woman you're misusing it against. And obviously, language shifts and evolves, and maybe within my lifetime, the term male gaze will have been fully bastardized into just meaning a thing I imagine a man would find sexy, and I will have been an old man yelling at a cloud forever, having insisted that there was actual theory that went along with it. And to be clear, disagreeing with this bastardization of terminology to make the point isn't the only way that I disagree with what I think is being expressed here. We've established by now, here and in my other Sabrina video, that I just straight up don't think the terminology of the male gaze is appropriate to use either for a human woman or for a music video directed by that human woman. I disagree, though, not just with how these people are saying it, but what I think they are trying to say. If I try to take my most empathetic reading toward what's being conveyed when people say that Sabrina Carpenter is pandering to the male gaze, it's that they're using misapplied theory to vent a real and valid frustration, even if I disagree with their choice in where to target that frustration. So just assuming that the male gaze is a thing we can pander to and not a way we should understand the way that men in particular use the language of film to portray and dehumanize women, I think to say that Sabrina Carpenter is pandering to the male gaze is to accept some assumptions I'm not quite happy with. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's not the outrage autocomplete, maybe this misunderstanding of the male gaze, which we're just going to accept from here forward as Laura Mulvey's theory being misapplied in the hopes of having a word less scary than patriarchal approval. Because yes, of course, we live in a patriarchal society. Men and their approval are responsible for so many levels of power and societal acceptance. But, I mean, come on. Can we be a little bit serious? Is this patriarchal approval really where Sabrina Carpenter is pandering toward? Do we really think that? One of the carry-on ideas that I disagree with is, ironically enough, something that actually is included in the academia around the male gaze in film, which is the assumption of a male audience as the default. And even outside of the framework of the male gaze, we see that assumption of a male audience as the default or as the more important segment of a given audience all the time. Women who are fans of things are so frequently disregarded as unimportant or as not meaningful members of a given audience. This is an impulse we see from creators all the time, but it is not an impulse that I see from Sabrina or her team. In fact, I would argue that Sabrina's version of this sort of joyful femininity feels extremely aimed toward other women. I would say, peering around at her merch, or the crowds at her concerts, or the culture around her music, that it feels pretty obvious to me that women are, in fact, Sabrina Carpenter's intended audience, and thus who her whole shtick is marketed to. When you think of the fandoms that propel artists to fame, the dedicated fans who enjoy something that is self-referential, who make sure that their favorites stay at the top of the charts, who fight in the trenches of unfair discourse against their idol, listen, while fandom is gender neutral, and I'm sidestepping Taylor Swift in this section the same way I will be sidestepping Katy Perry in the next, other than to say this. When you think Swiftie, you probably think woman, right? So why then, when Sabrina Carpenter does have a dedicated fan base, and it is primarily women, when those are the people who are paying her bills and attending her concerts, do we think that's not where she is pandering? I would say that yes, Sabrina Carpenter does pander, and while the female gaze does not exist, she does most certainly pander to other women. And I think you have to really disregard this sort of expression of womanhood and gender and presentation as meaningful on its own merits if you decide that it is bad on the basis that you can imagine a man finding it sexy. This doesn't mean I'm saying that I think men are put off by her whole sexy, nighty, vintage teddy vibe. I'm sure that they're not. It just means that I think assigning men as the target audience for somebody else's actions and then disregarding them for that reason kind of doubles back around into being a little bit misogynistic on your part. And just speaking frankly, I do not believe that if Sabrina Carpenter were truly intentionally pandering to men, that she would kill them in her videos so consistently or have such sleepover bestie vibes at her show. I know I say that and open myself up for someone to timestamp this argument in the comments and tell me that sleepover vibes is something that can be sexualized by men easily, and I agree. I know there are plenty of examples of sexy girl pillow fights in media that actually could be criticized using the language of the male gaze, but I don't think that's the primary fantasy Sabrina Carpenter is selling. I don't even think, seriously examining the music she makes and the songs she writes, that romance is the primary fantasy she is selling. I think the fantasy of all of this is not that she's pandering to you as a man, but that she is you, or she's your friend. That's why the concerts are this big sleepover vibe. That's why a man's best friend feels like hanging out with your friend in her 20s while she tells you how hard dating is. I also think, and I'm shocked by how little this comes up in conversations where we pretend like women can opt out of their own subjugation just by making or liking more feminist album covers, whatever a feminist album cover would even look like. The truth of the matter is that there are men who will feel pandered to even by explicit attempts to not pander to them. There are men who boast online about feeling aroused by feminists who are most certainly not doing any of that for the gratification of men, using language of male dominance or the subjugation of women. I don't think that language needs to be softened for the express purpose of being more palatable to people who are already committed to your dehumanization. And I don't think Sabrina Carpenter's expression and art needs to be softened for that reason either. That's not me saying that I think it's objectively feminist, although maybe I'm making this disclaimer too late into the video and nobody who thinks that that's what I'm saying even got this far in the first place. All I'm saying is, while I might not find Sabrina Carpenter or any pop star's work to be particularly feminist, I don't think being really weird about it is particularly feminist either. There are obviously a multitude of ways in which people are really weird about Sabrina Carpenter, whether feministly or not, and I'm not going to be able to go over all of them in this video without driving myself mad like the hero in some sort of cautionary tale. But I did want to cover just the broad strokes, which in my observation seem to always be these unfounded male gaze claims and this queerbaiting complaint, and a very specific version of the queerbaiting complaint at that. Something you may have noticed from those polls earlier, when people are participating in those queerbaiting claims, there's a real common theme of them pulling a sort of conversational right of way and saying about whatever shit that they're upset with Sabrina Carpenter for, I don't know, apparently stealing queer valor for. That as a lesbian or as an actual queer woman, they are actually really tired of and also materially harmed by this. One of the comments on that thread read, "Yeah, I'm bisexual and don't want to speak for anyone else, but it feels like we're going back to the Katy Perry I Kissed a Girl era where performative lesbianism slash bisexuality in women is used to be quirky slash titillating. That was not an era I enjoyed when I was figuring out my own sexuality, and I really hope we don't revisit it further." And with the exception of the massive sidestep that I'm doing around Katy Perry, I get it. I get it. I Kissed a Girl is a missing puzzle piece in this conversation we're about to have. I don't have the space to tackle her the way I need to in a video right now. I find this conversation genuinely fascinating. Another comment, for example, reads,
This is a widely unhinged leap, or possibly widely known, and I'm just out of the loop take. But I think so many women are finding their sexuality in their 30s to 40s because for years, being with girls was only ever shown as something you just did for fun in the moment, pop culture way. It wasn't ever shown as being a part of who you were and could be, if that makes any sense.
and that is a discussion that I would love to have in broader terms than are available to me when I'm strictly talking about Sabrina Carpenter. So let's move into the next chapter. I tricked you. It's not entirely about Sabrina Carpenter, it's still feminist analysis. That's right. The point of this video is that I would like to give my lesbian opinion on the fabled, mythical, straight girl who gets drunk at parties and makes out with other women for male attention. Here's the thing. Obviously, I don't believe that there is no woman out there who has ever explicitly said that their reasoning for wanting to kiss another woman is because boys would think it was hot. I'm sure that's an experience plenty of people have had, even more so if the reasoning for the kiss was never laid out and you were left to ascribe motivations in the absence of actual insight into another person's rich and vast inner world. So I'll say, I believe the straight woman who only kisses other women for male attention exists, sure, but I do think she's a bit less common than is let on, especially quite a bit less common than is let on if you search for any related terms on Reddit and find literal decades of discourse worth of debate on this topic, where you might get a little lost in the sauce and begin to think that the people making the worst assault on our rights in the last 2 decades were in fact straight women making out with each other at bars, clubs, or parties. If you'll allow me to get, I don't know, maybe a little bit radical with it, I think even a lot of the women who would say that male attention was the impetus for their time spent kissing other women could probably be asked, in a society that was less homophobic generally and biphobic specifically, to spend a little time unpacking their compulsory heterosexuality to see if maybe there was another thing motivating a desire to kiss women when they got drunk at a bar or a party. Just like with the male gaze thing, my issue with this argument is not just that I disagree solely on the basis of not liking the words the people making this kind of criticism are using to levy it. I do understand this line of criticism enough to actually disagree with it. I've spent a lot of time in the trenches of online lesbian discourse. Trust me when I say I understand this line of criticism. Sometimes what's being criticized here is exactly the image it evokes. The girls at a party looking to seem interesting and sexy, kissing for male gratification, to a cheering crowd of onlookers. That's what happens in movies, at least, when people's motivations are a bit more clearly telegraphed than they tend to be in real life. I know just by saying this, I'm going to get comments about how this does happen in real life. People take pictures of girls making out at parties that you go to, and they cheer, and it's all for male satisfaction. And to that I say, I believe you, and you still don't know how the two women participating in that kiss feel about it because you're not part of it, no matter how many feelings you might have about seeing it. With these lines, what people are invoking isn't always that movie scene vibe. Sometimes what's being criticized when invoking the specter of a woman who only kisses other women for male attention is the idea of somebody not taking the possibility of gay romance as seriously as they do heterosexual romance. That's a real and true thing that straight people do, and it hurts and it sucks, and I understand feeling frustrated with it. I really do. And sometimes criticizing for kissing girls for male attention means, like, I think the way that you're being grabby with your friend might be for somebody else's gratification. The thing is, the more of these Reddit threads I read, the more that I kept thinking that what was really being expressed, if I stripped it down to its essentials, was these posters expressing grief at the limitations that the society they live in imposes onto their ability to have relationships with other women. It's a lot of, I'm not able to do that, or this other woman is able to do this and not face the same level of harassment or discrimination that I do. Or maybe, I think, on some level, even if we're not ready to admit it to ourselves, I may not be brave enough to do that. I might be a little bit more hesitant and vulnerable and scared. And I might think that that's because this means more to me than it does to other people, but also maybe everybody experiences sexuality differently. But that grief at the society we live in, I'm pretty sure that's what it is, despite whatever nefarious straight woman we make up in our head to be angry at. And so, having also been very inclined towards this kind of thinking, I am inclined to meet people with this sort of bugbear where they're at, except they're doing it at the expense of this very woman-shaped scapegoat. And I think it's pretty easy for me to say something like, oh, this woman just doesn't exist, or even, you have to assume a lot of negative intent to speak as though this is a common experience and sort of wash my hands of this sort of discourse. But, as I said at the top of the video, I think these assumptions and frustrations that we're invited to have about women are fascinating and telling. I think it's fascinating how many times we fall back on these same defaults. I think it's fascinating how many ways that we can think of that a woman might correct her own actions preemptively to not fall into being a Karen or the friend that's too woke, or the girl kissing other girls for male attention, right? I can't wash my hands of this one, because while this completely male approval oriented straight woman kissing other women lecherously for male approval and conducting herself for the male gaze doesn't feel very likely or common to me, I do think she's the kind of woman that other women would fear being, would self-correct in the hopes of avoiding having to feel sorry for having intruded on something that they're not allowed to, because their desire to kiss a woman just because they think it sounds fun, but maybe not because they're ready for a long-term committed relationship, has been framed as some sort of intrusion onto something other people have more of a right to than they do. And I see that framing a lot, very much like in that last comment Allie read. And while I understand where it's coming from somewhat, I do find it deeply misguided. In the Reddit thread about the house tour music video, as a bunch of internet users rallied to say how they could do without the shots where they could see the women's butts and the so-called supposed sexualizing lesbianism for the male gaze or whatever, a few users commiserated that essentially the culture of straight women kissing and flirting in bars made it more difficult for them as a queer woman to realize that a relationship with a woman was a serious option for them and that it was what they wanted for the rest of their life. And I get that. I really, really get that. I can remember the exact moment that I realized it was an option for me to like women, and all the lights went on in my head, which was after years of waking up crying sometimes from guilt and shame about having dreams about two women kissing. I so understand the feeling of frustration that something so obvious can be so hard for us to access, can be intentionally kept so hard for us to access by the constraints of the patriarchal and cis heteronormative society we live in. But, and I say this with all love, women who aren't respecting the sanctity of sapphic-hood or whatever, they are not the reason that it was hard to realize what you wanted and that that was an option. They're also, living in a society. And there are two different places I feel compelled to go with this, so let's start with what I think is probably the more obvious one, considering my whole, lesbianism deal. First of all, this woman kissing other women for attention or being handsy with her friend or whatever else we are grading as a less noble voyage into homoeroticism than getting married and adopting cats. She could be straight. I mean, she also could be bisexual, which is a thing a lot of people really fail to consider in pretty much any circumstance, especially one where there's a woman to get mad at. She could also be, bisexual, but doesn't really realize that's an option for her yet, or interested in hookups, but not in a long-term relationship. Maybe she's not interested in romantic relationships at all, or maybe she's battling shame and fear and however many years she's been alive worth of social conditioning to feel allowed to feel attraction to a woman, and maybe that's a little easier at a party or a bar. And if boys are around or whatever, can we stop making everything about them for 1 second, even in our own heads and discourse? But the other place that I could take this is that this woman could be sincerely straight. She could identify that way, see herself as such, move through the world as a straight woman, and I still wouldn't think that she had any less right to touch and joke with her friends than queer women do with each other. As long as everyone is communicating with each other, as long as everyone is a consenting adult, I generally think it's okay to do things with other people that feel good just because they feel good. And I know that on its face, the idea that it's only queer women who should be kissing each other doesn't feel like a moralization, but I think that's what it ultimately is. Knowing, or just trying to remember, that you can't know the interiority of another person's mind, that your estimation of their intentions might not actually line up with the reality of their experience, just makes this specter of Girl Kisser George a lot less intimidating. I don't think even the straight version of that woman, who is able to explore her sexuality, free to do so unrestricted, even if it won't ever result in committed relationships and marriage to a woman, I don't think that she is as contrary to my rights as being weird about whether or not she should be allowed to explore that is. And to bring things back more specifically to Sabrina Carpenter, when that presumably straight woman that we're mad at is doing things like donating millions of dollars to pro-LGBT funds, I really do not feel like this is a situation where my rights as a queer woman are under any kind of threat or attack. To pull from that Pride.com article once again,
Sabrina Carpenter is doing the exact opposite of queerbaiting because her relationship to queerness isn't opportunistic. Instead, it's deeply encoded in her performance of femininity. Admittedly, she is still presenting as a conventionally attractive blonde, straight white woman, the identity in which queer people are punished when they don't fit. But she brings the queerness into the broader stage in this position. And it even matters more because we are living in an era when politicians are trying to overturn same-sex marriage, when drag queen performances are being banned, when transgender people are losing the most basic healthcare rights, and the list could go on. But Sabrina Carpenter refuses to play it safe by regressing to the doll-like blonde girl image. Instead, she doubles down, queering her image by camping it, and thriving in this era. She makes it explicit by showing drag queens, trans rights signs, and glamours in her VMAs performance. She speaks with her actions by raising funds for the Transgender Law Center. As she wrapped up her short and sweet tour, Cultural Moment of the Year, she didn't stop there. She moved beyond the queerness to something even larger, an oppositional power against the institutions and ideologies that oppress queer people in the first place. When ICE used her Juno as background music in one of their propaganda videos, Sabrina Carpenter publicly condemned the post, calling it evil and disgusting. Even after White House Deputy Press Secretary Abigail Jackson hit back, the post was deleted quietly. Not only does she inhabit the aesthetics of queer camp, but she also refuses to let her expressions be appropriated by ideologies that harm the community she aligns with. And this is the ultimate answer to her pop girl persona. In an era when queer people are forced to be invisible, visibility matters. In an era when authenticity is smothered, artifice speaks. Sabrina Carpenter may look short and sweet, but her artistic persona is the sharpest tool that makes queerness unapologetically loud and clear.
I know that the Handmaid's Tale cosplay protesters and the, mostly deeply misguided Scientologist starring adaptation on Hulu have given her work kind of a bad reputation lately, but there actually is a Margaret Atwood passage that you see circulating around online a lot once you look for it, and that I think works extremely well in this conversation.
Male fantasies, male fantasies. Is everything run by male fantasies? Up on a pedestal or down on your knees. It's all a male fantasy. That you're strong enough to take what they dish out or else too weak to do anything about it. Even pretending you aren't catering to male fantasies is a male fantasy. Pretending you're unseen, pretending you have a life of your own. That you can wash your feet and comb your hair unconscious of the ever-present watcher peering through the keyhole. Peering through the keyhole in your own head, if nowhere else. You are a woman with a man inside watching a woman. You are your own voyeur.
I think looking at criticisms of Sabrina Carpenter as a response to living in patriarchy, honestly, especially as a response to feeling as though Sabrina Carpenter is the 5-foot-tall straw woman who performs for patriarchal approval better than you do and reaps the benefits for it, which I will be discussing in part 2 of this video over on my Patreon. I understand seeing the Man's Best Friend album cover or other aspects of Sabrina Carpenter and her gender theater presentation and wanting to recoil from it. I especially understand that when I think about, as Atwood put it, the man in a woman's head watching a woman, which I think is what a lot of people are trying to express when they borrow the language of the male gaze. We understand what we think would elicit this patriarchal approval that we know we will never live up to. This patriarchal approval, which no woman can ever live up to, not Sabrina, and not women who are far more dedicated to stripping away our rights than she is. And I understand feeling like you can see Sabrina through that perspective and only through that perspective. We have all been trained to internalize this perspective, to at least subliminally police ourselves and others against it, even if we then end up inverting what it means to succeed and to fail when it comes to performing for that male approval or not. I get it, even if, upon a little further examination, I ultimately decided I didn't want to assume a default male audience for another woman and her decisions. Which is the same thing I just asked you to do when it comes to the same sort of flirty, jokey, not so serious affection between women that we see in Sabrina Carpenter's videos, and maybe from other women who hit some of the same buttons in us that Sabrina hits, who do some of the things that might instinctively raise our hackles. I think it feels really good and simple and easy to only denounce the lecherous, evil male gaze and assume that that won't have any downstream effects. Of course, you aren't talking about real or valid attraction. Of course, sapphic attraction doesn't count when we vilify attraction felt toward women. If we even think about women who are attracted to women when we talk about attraction felt toward women, which honestly still doesn't happen as often as should in these conversations. But a lot of this bastardization of the male gaze, the use of it to assume a male audience in the head of the woman you are observing, whether she is a pop star or a woman kissing another woman at a party or a girl who leans into aesthetics that you don't understand, it all just feels like, to me, it has a really nasty potential to trend into moralizing attraction. And the blowback from there falls not only onto straight women who, as I've mentioned earlier, are identifying with Sabrina and with the idea of being the object of desire in this way that she represents, which is not a morally wrong or bad thing to want, but also onto women like myself who are attracted to women and who deserve to maybe not have additional reasons intellectualized for us to feel guilty for and ashamed about that. And I care a lot about both of these issues. Not only do I and other queer women not need to take on more shame, as though attraction to women is a moral failure, it's something that only happens as a result of their objectification, that we need to check and double check that we aren't having attraction toward women the wrong way, even just in the privacy of our own head. But also, I care about it because I don't want straight women left behind in my version of liberation either. And I don't just mean that because I think it's great if the reason they didn't die wondering is because they found out they actually are attracted to women. But if they don't die wondering because they had a chance to at least give it a shot at some point, that it was at least some level of an option for them to consider, that's good too. And hey, if they do want to date women, and even if Sabrina Carpenter and the friends she gets handsy with in her videos never do, if cheeky pop songs about how exhausting it can be to date men are some kind of catalyst to examining whether or not your specific relationship or your relationships with men in general are fulfilling, I think that's beautiful. And if it doesn't make you stop dating men, that's fine too. That is not a condition on my ability to feel solidarity with a woman. I'm sure that this will not be the last time I clock in for a shift at the Sabrina Carpenter Discourse Factory. So if you are interested in more videos like this, especially when I finally talk about Chapel Roan, make sure you subscribe. And if you want to catch how I learned to stop worrying and love the blonde and get your name on the screen like all these lovely folks you're about to see, make sure you check out the Patreon. Thank you again so much to Valessa for sponsoring this video, and to my friends who helped me put this one together. I love you. I'll see you soon. Let's go to the credit roll. Patreon is going to get that sequel video I mentioned earlier, as well as some behind the scenes and more about why I've been a little bit quiet the last few months. Thank you so much to everybody who donated for the GoFundMe and who has supported me over the last few months especially, and these last couple of years in general since I started making videos. I can't wait to hear what you think, and I'll see you again soon. Bye. We're gonna upload this as bonus content. I'm gonna call it Joanne SMR. You don't want me to capitalize on it? You have moral and ethical concerns? But I used the Patreon money to buy you stuff. So it's okay, right?